John Defterius is in Abu Dhabi. Samuel Burke is in Dubai. Starting first with yourself, Samuel Burke, just on these numbers that you see, the Softbank investment, you see the other tech companies finding themselves, again, with the question, do they or don't they? Uber's CEO has said he's not going.
What's interesting here, Richard, is that Softbank stock down 7%, mainly on fears from investors about some type of sanction going against Saudi Arabia, even though all of the analysts we spoke to have said they don't see any sanctions. That's not in the cards, they believe. But what they do think could happen is the same pressure that you were just talking about on the business and tech community not to attend Davos in the desert could spread to investment. You mentioned some of the companies. I made a list. If you look at it, Uber, WeWork, Didi Chuxing, the Chinese version of Uber, and Slack have all taken investment. So what the analysts say could happen is all that pressure could add up. But that hasn't happened yet. I have tried to contact all these companies, Richard, and either I've gotten a no comment or I've gotten no response whatsoever when it comes to their investments that they've received from Saudi Arabia. Much easier to pull out of a conference than it is to pull an investment.
John Defterius, what is the current level of thinking between companies about whether they should go or not? And if they are pulling out, why are they pulling out? If we do not have a definitive view on what had happened to Jamal Khashoggi.
Well, Richard, I think this is a tough decision for the Wall Street heavyweights that you singled out here, and they don't get bigger than Fink and Schwartzman and Jamie Dimon. Let's be blunt. They want to stay engaged in Saudi Arabia, but at a safe distance. I think they thought this week was loaded with risk, and I think they perhaps waited too long to make the decision. You rightly point out that the Treasury Secretary, Steven Mnuchin, is staying engaged. I've been in touch with those with him on the delegation that were in the International Monetary Fund. They're watching events closely, so the back door is ajar. You could even say the same for Christine Lagarde as well, Richard. She says she'll speak her mind. She wants to remain engaged in Saudi Arabia, but waiting for evidence over the next 48 hours. We have to break these two categories down, though, the investment from Saudi Arabia. The outbound investment into the investment funds of the United States and Europe is huge. The Blackstone fund could double up to $40 billion, the Softbank fund up to $100 billion, and JP Morgan has a mandate to handle a lot of privatizations and potentially eventually the big IPO for Aramco, which has been shelved for the time being. And then there's the inbound investment, which is extraordinary. We're looking at $450 billion over the last 10 years, and the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has just notched it up a bit. So they want to remain into the country. Big players like GE and Siemens have been there for years, and they want to show that they still support the kingdom, but not when they see this sort of geopolitical risk that's right in front of us, of course, because of the events in Istanbul.
I can hear viewers saying how much of all of this is just downright hypocrisy. At the end of the day, they will be, even if Saudi, even if there is culpability in the murder of Khashoggi, they will be back in to do business just as soon as they can. Because isn't President Trump absolutely right when he says, hey, if we don't sell them the arms, someone else will?
If that's a question to me, I think you're absolutely correct. $110 billion in defense contracts and orders. Just over 10% has actually been committed. But clearly the Russians and the Chinese would like to fill that void. President Trump was struggling to try to get a $1 trillion infrastructure project underway in the legislation through Congress. In Saudi Arabia, it's $1.4 trillion. The U.S. has 300 million consumers. Saudi Arabia, about 30 million. It is a bounty for inbound investors going into the country.
But Samuel, do you think there's a difference here between how traditional industries and bankers would view the potential hypocrisy of going straight back in again versus new technologies and new tech, high tech? How would they view it? I mean, are they in it morally, or will they play the moral game, or will they play give us the cash?
Well, what I was fascinated by, Richard, I'm in Dubai right now for one of the biggest tech conferences in the world, and I was speaking to tech executives in this region. I said, guys, are you nervous here? Dubai is a huge trading partner with Saudi Arabia. I said, aren't you nervous about what could happen? The president of the United States just said on 60 Minutes there will be severe punishment if the Saudis found to be culpable. And they brushed all this off, Richard. They said, clearly you don't check your Twitter feed, Samuel. The president had just tweeted that he had spoken to the king of Saudi Arabia and that he denies any knowledge whatsoever. They were saying that tweet sends a clear message to them that they don't think that there will be a strong reaction from the United States. That's the perspective here, at least.
Samuel Burke, John Dev Terrius, thank you. Let's